Welcome to a special Election Eve deep dive with us tonight. It does feel like the whole world is kind of holding its breath right now. On the eve of the 2024 election, the race is so tight. I mean, the dead heat between Trump and Harris. It feels like a really pivotal moment for America and honestly for the global landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. We're diving deep into all these news sources today, and yeah, they paint this picture. It's a fascinating one and a little concerning at times about what's at stake here.
Yeah, for sure. So over 75 million Americans have already voted. What's the final push looking like from the two candidates?
Well, we're seeing very different strategies. Trump is doubling down on his base right now, leaning heavily into anti-immigrant rhetoric, really focusing on that border security and tapping into that feeling that American values and the American way of life is under threat.
And Harris,
Uh,
taking a different approach.
Yeah, she's aiming for that wider appeal, trying to connect with voters who are feeling this disconnect between the booming U.S. economy and their own financial struggles, focusing on those key issues, promising to end the war in Gaza and address economic anxieties through specific policy proposals.
It's interesting you mentioned that economic paradox. The sources really highlight this strange disconnect, this booming economy. But so many Americans are feeling left behind.
Precisely, it's record corporate profits we're seeing, but at the same time, stagnant wages, rising costs of living, a lack of access to affordable health care. So this financial strain is palpable for many, and Harris is looking to tap into that.
Yeah. And it's not just Americans watching this election. The global implications are huge.
Absolutely. The UN has even expressed concerns about a potential Trump victory, really highlighting the anxieties the international community has about potential disruption, to trade to international relations and even climate change policy.
So it seems like, yeah, the world is holding its breath to see which direction America chooses.
Yeah.
And speaking of the global stage, that war in the Middle East is escalating right now. Rising tensions between Israel and Lebanon.
It's a very volatile situation, and it unfortunately does tie into the U.S. election. Voters are really concerned about America's role in the world, and these ongoing conflicts could actually be deciding factors for those who are disillusioned with the current U.S. foreign policy.
Right. And it's not just those two main contenders. The sources point to third-party candidates playing a bigger role in this election than usual.
That's right. The margins are so tight that even a small percentage of the votes going to a third-party candidate could swing the election. And it really highlights that growing dissatisfaction with the two-party system. People are looking for alternative voices, feeling that neither Trump nor Harris really represents their views.
So every vote really could make a difference. Now, beyond those big headlines and the main players,
Yeah.
what else is catching your eye in the news? Anything that gives us a deeper understanding of the American political landscape?
Yeah, there are a few stories that offer kind of a different perspective. One that stands out is this account of a Quaker who works on the U.S.-Mexico border, providing aid to migrants. And his experience has led him to believe that whoever wins the situation for migrants won't change much.
Wow. That's a sobering thought. Is he saying that the issues are so ingrained that neither candidate has a real solution?
It seems that way. He's seen these complex realities of border security and immigration policy firsthand, and he sees it as this systemic challenge that goes beyond the rhetoric of just a single election cycle, and it raises the question of whether the candidates are adequately addressing these complex issues.
Right. And we also see this town in Oklahoma that's been transformed by immigration,
Yeah.
reflecting the changing face of America.
This story really speaks to those evolving demographics, the challenges and anxieties that arise in communities that are experiencing these rapid changes. It forces us to look beyond those simple binaries and consider those complexities of immigration's impact across the nation.
Yeah. And speaking of groups demanding accountability, Native American voters are stepping into the spotlight, and they could be a decisive force.
Absolutely. They're demanding that politicians address those historical injustices and those ongoing struggles their communities face. It's a powerful reminder that real progress requires systemic change and ensuring that all voices are represented.
And then there's that elephant in the room.
Mm.
The potential for turmoil after the election is real. Trump's already hinting he might not accept the results, suggesting potential lawsuits, recounts, even unrest.
Yeah, this is a serious concern. Trump's rhetoric is very similar to what we heard in 2020. And it raises questions about the stability of American democracy, about the fragility of democratic norms, and the importance of a peaceful transfer of power.
Right. We've covered so much ground already. And there's a sense of urgency as we get closer and closer to the election.
It is a critical moment, and it's just vital to stay informed and engaged, particularly as we get deeper into this.
Right. So let's take a closer look at why either Trump or Harris might actually win, starting with the factors that are fueling Trump's appeal to a segment of the American population.
Well, Trump's appeal rests on a few key pillars. His populist message and that anti-establishment stance really resonate with voters, who are disillusioned with the political elite. He positions himself as that outsider, the one who can come in and fix a broken system.
It's that drain the swamp mentality. He's the disruptor.
Exactly. And he effectively taps into that sense of cultural anxiety. Giving a voice to those who feel their values and their way of life is under threat, particularly from globalization and demographic shifts.
So it's more than just policies. It's about identity and belonging.
Precisely. He speaks directly to the anxieties of those who feel unheard or left behind by the system, offering them a sense of validation and belonging, and that can be a very powerful motivator.
And Kamala Harris, what's her strategy for connecting?
Well, Harris is taking a different approach, emphasizing experience and focusing on policy. She's positioning herself as the steady hand, the experienced leader who can navigate these challenges, presenting herself as the adult in the room, in stark contrast to Trump's, more unpredictable style.
So while Trump is appealing to that emotion and identity, Harris is focusing on reason and experience. What about the issues? What's really resonating with voters?
Well, Harris is focusing on issues that have that broad appeal that affect a wider swath of the electorate. Healthcare, climate change, economic inequality, these are concerns that cut across party lines. She's aiming to build that coalition of voters who are looking for solutions to those everyday challenges.
So a more traditional strategy, focusing on that policy experience to appeal to that audience. And then there's that wild card we mentioned, those third-party candidates. Why are they getting traction this time around?
It boils down to that growing dissatisfaction. With the two-party system, many Americans just feel like neither party represents them. And for some, voting third party is a way to express that frustration with the status quo.
It's a protest vote. Like, hey, neither of you are speaking to my concerns. And in a race this close, those protest votes could be decisive.
Exactly. Even a small percentage shift could tip the scales. So it just adds another layer of complexity and unpredictability to an already nail-biting election.
Right. We've talked about that potential chaos after the election, with Trump already hinting at contesting the results. But before we dive deeper into that, I want to shift our focus to some international news that could impact the election's outcome.
Yeah, there are some big events unfolding around the world right now that could influence American voters. The war in the Middle East, the devastating floods in Spain, and the pro-EU victory in Moldova all carry potential ramifications.
Okay. Let's break them down one by one, starting with that war in the Middle East. What's happening there and how could it impact the U.S. election?
Well, the war between Israel and Lebanon is escalating, and there's no end in sight. The conflict really highlights that ongoing instability in the region, which would fuel anxiety among American voters.
And it plays into that whole concern about America's role on the world stage. If a candidate is seen as weak or unable to navigate those international crises, that could cost them votes.
Precisely. Voters want that leader who can project strength, who can ensure America's security in this volatile world. And the war in the Middle East just brings those concerns into sharp focus.
And what about those devastating floods in Spain? How could that have any impact on this side of the Atlantic?
Well, the floods in Spain have caused a political storm over there, with the king and the prime minister facing criticism for their handling of the disaster.
So even a natural disaster thousands of miles away can have political repercussions.
Absolutely. And while it might seem very distant from the U.S. election, it reflects those broader challenges of climate change and disaster response. And those are issues that are increasingly relevant to voters all over the world.
It feeds into that growing sense of unease about the future. The feeling that we're facing this convergence of crises that require decisive leadership.
Exactly. And speaking of shifting global dynamics, the pro-EU victory in Moldova, that's an interesting development.
What's the significance there? How could that factor into the U.S. political landscape?
Well, that victory is a sign that Russia's influence might be waning in the region. It's a positive development for those who support democracy and freedom, but it also highlights that struggle for power that's going on in Eastern Europe.
It speaks to that larger geopolitical chess game. And the U.S. is a major player. Voters want a leader who can navigate those complexities.
Absolutely. And the outcome of this U.S. election will impact those dynamics. The next president will inherit a world facing some complex challenges, requiring a deep understanding of foreign policy and a very steady hand.
A lot to consider. And we've really only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to unpack and understand about this election.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. We'll delve deeper into those issues, the candidates, the scenarios, and those long-term implications of this election.
We'll connect those dots, analyze the trends, and offer insights to help you navigate this critical moment in history. Stay with us as we continue our deep dive.
Now, shifting gears back to the U.S., let's unpack one of the most concerning aspects of this election, that potential for chaos. We touched on Trump's rhetoric, but the sources suggest there's a deeper strategy at play.
What do you mean? There's more to it than just Trump refusing to concede.
It seems so. Trump and his allies are actively laying the groundwork to contest the results through legal challenges, demands for recounts, and even by potentially mobilizing his supporters.
Right, the sources mention he's already sowing those seeds of doubt
Yeah.
about the integrity of the election.
Exactly. Claims of potential voter fraud, a rigged system. It really echoes his strategy from 2020. And it creates that atmosphere of distrust that primes his supporters to challenge the results, no matter what the outcome is.
It feels dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, this could have serious consequences for the country.
Absolutely. It undermines faith in the whole democratic process and could even lead to a constitutional crisis if his supporters refuse to accept the results.
It's not just about Trump's words, is it? The sources point to this troubling trend of misinformation and conspiracy theories just flooding social media.
That's right. Social media has become this breeding ground for unsubstantiated claims and just outright falsehoods about the election. And it amplifies that distrust, making it even harder for voters to figure out what's true.
So what can we do? How do we safeguard the integrity of our elections when we're facing this onslaught of misinformation?
It's a multifaceted challenge, and it requires a multi-pronged approach. I think first and foremost, we have to be informed and really discerning consumers of information. We can't just accept everything we see online.
We need to be critical thinkers. Check our sources. Be wary of anything that seems, overly sensational or emotionally charged.
Exactly. Media literacy is crucial. We also need to hold our leaders accountable, demand that they uphold democratic principles, no matter their political affiliation or their ambitions.
Right. Reject those who spread those lies and misinformation, and support those who stand up for truth and integrity.
Precisely. And we need to strengthen our institutions, make sure that our electoral systems are secure and resilient against manipulation or interference.
And that brings us back to another issue that's been kind of bubbling under the surface, that economic anxiety. We talked about that disconnect between the booming economy and the actual experience of a lot of Americans.
It's a complex issue, but one that people feel deeply. While some sectors are thriving, many Americans are dealing with stagnant wages, rising costs of living, limited access to affordable health care.
It's that feeling of being left behind. You work hard, but you don't see the rewards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this economic reality, it's a key factor in this election. It's driving that voter frustration and shaping their choices.
It's fueling that desire for change, that yearning for a leader who can bridge that gap between the promise of prosperity and that reality of struggle.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the candidates and their approaches. We've explored Trump's appeal to cultural anxiety, Harris's focus on experience and policy. But what could actually tip the scales in their favor?
Let's start with Trump. Beyond his core base, what else could lead to a victory?
Well, one factor is incumbency. Despite the controversies and the tight race being the incumbent still carries weight. Some voters stick with the familiar, especially during uncertain times.
That devil you know kind of thing. Even if you're not happy with the current leadership, it's less risky than the unknown.
Exactly. And Trump is also a master of media manipulation. He knows how to grab headlines, dominate the news cycle, and really control the narrative.
Even negative attention can work in his favor. Keeps him front and center.
Precisely. He thrives on that controversy and attention, and he uses it to his advantage.
So it's not just about policy or ideology. It's about personality, performance, and that ability to command attention.
Absolutely. And then there's the strategic use of his core issues. Immigration, trade, national security. All tailored to resonate with his base.
He's playing to his strengths, focusing on those themes that have energized his supporters in the past.
Exactly. And it's a strategy that could work in a close race where mobilizing your base is key.
And Kamala Harris, what could contribute to her winning?
One key factor is her ability to mobilize that diverse coalition of voters. Women, minorities, young people, those who are disillusioned with Trump but not necessarily thrilled with the Democratic establishment.
So she needs to build that broad base of support that can counter Trump's base.
Exactly. And she needs to effectively communicate her policies. convince voters that she has the experience and the vision to lead.
She needs to be that real alternative, that path forward, address their concerns, and offer a more hopeful future.
Precisely. And then there's voter turnout. Getting people to the polls, especially those who might be disillusioned or apathetic, is going to be crucial.
It's not just about persuading them to vote for you. It's about getting them to vote at all.
Exactly. And in an election this close, every vote matters. The candidate who can get their supporters to the polls will have that advantage.
So many variables. Personality, policy, turnout, even global events, all shaping the outcome of this election.
It's a reminder that elections are not just about the candidates or the campaigns. They're about the state of the nation, the anxieties and aspirations of the people, and the forces shaping our world.
It's our responsibility as informed citizens to be engaged, understand the issues, and make our voices heard.
Absolutely. And to do so with a sense of hope, a commitment to dialogue, and a belief in our democracy to chart that better course.
Now let's dive into those lesser-known stories we mentioned, the ones that offer a different perspective on the American political landscape. Starting with that Quaker who helps migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. What's his story and what can we learn from it?
This Quaker story is a powerful reminder of the human cost of our immigration policies. He's seen firsthand the desperation of those fleeing violence and poverty, seeking safety and a better life for their families.
It puts a human face on those debates about immigration, reminding us that there are real people with real lives and real dreams behind those statistics and the rhetoric.
Exactly. And his belief that the situation won't change much no matter who wins, that's a sobering assessment of how entrenched this challenge is.
He's suggesting it goes beyond who's in the White House. It's a systemic issue that needs a fundamental shift in thinking and approach.
Precisely. He's challenging us to look beyond partisan politics and consider the moral and humanitarian aspects of this.
And speaking of the complexities of immigration, we have that story about a town in Oklahoma transformed by an influx of immigrants. What does that tell us about the changing face of America?
This town's story challenges those simple narratives about immigration. It shows how immigrants can bring new life to communities, bring new energy, new ideas, and contribute to the economy and the culture of our nation.
It's a story about adaptation, resilience, and the ongoing evolution of what it means to be American.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that the U.S. has always been a nation of immigrants, this melting pot of cultures and perspectives.
A story about our past, our present, and our future. The American dream is a shared aspiration, one that keeps drawing people here from all over.
Precisely. And it challenges us to embrace that diversity, to build those bridges across cultural divides, and create a more inclusive society.
And then we have that story of Native American voters stepping into the spotlight, demanding accountability from politicians. What are their concerns, and why is their vote so important?
Native American communities have been marginalized and disenfranchised for so long, their voices ignored, their concerns dismissed. But in this election, they're making themselves heard, demanding that their issues are addressed.
They're fighting for recognition, for respect, for the fulfillment of treaty obligations, and for their right to self-determination.
Exactly. They want their communities treated with dignity, and their voices heard in the halls of power.
Their vote could be decisive, especially in those key swing states.
Absolutely. They're a force to be reckoned with, and politicians are finally starting to pay attention.
It reminds us that justice and equality must reach every American, including those who have been historically marginalized.
Precisely. And that the American story is still being written. That struggle for a more perfect union is an ongoing process.
And as we explore this election, we need to keep these stories in mind. Remember the human impact of those policies, and make sure that everyone's voice is represented in our democracy.
Absolutely. These stories remind us that elections are not just about abstract ideas or political maneuvering. They're about people's lives, their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for a better future.
Now let's shift gears and talk about another issue that's weighing heavily on people's minds: the economy. We mentioned that disconnect between the booming stock market and the struggles of everyday people.
This economic paradox is a big source of anxiety for voters. While some are seeing record profits, many Americans are facing stagnant wages, rising costs, and they lack that economic security.
It's that feeling that you're working hard but not getting ahead, that the American dream is slipping away.
Exactly. And it fuels that frustration and resentment, that feeling that the system is rigged.
So what are the candidates saying about this? How are they addressing this anxiety?
Trump points to the overall strength of the economy, highlights job growth and low unemployment. He argues that his policies created this booming economy that benefits everyone.
But is that message resonating with those who aren't feeling those benefits?
That's the question, isn't it? Many voters are skeptical of Trump's claims. They point to the rising costs of healthcare, housing, and education.
They don't see that trickle-down effect he's promising.
Exactly. And that's where Harris sees an opportunity. She focuses on the struggles of working families, promising policies to address income inequality, make healthcare more affordable, and create those good-paying jobs.
She's tapping into that anxiety, offering a different vision for how the economy can work for everyone, not just those at the top.
Precisely. She argues we need to invest in people, not just corporations, and create an economy that's fair, just, and sustainable.
So the economy is a battleground in this election, with the candidates offering these contrasting visions for how to address the anxieties and the hopes of the people.
It's a debate that will probably continue until Election Day, with both sides fighting for those votes of people feeling the squeeze.
And as we head into these final hours, it's clear the economy will be key in deciding who wins the White House.
Now let's talk about healthcare.
Healthcare. It's a perennial issue in American politics, and it's one that brings up those strong emotions and those deep divisions.
The U.S. healthcare system is complex, it's expensive, and honestly, it's often confusing, and it's an issue that touches everyone's lives.
We all need healthcare, and we want to know that we can get it when we need it without going broke.
Exactly, and that's why it's such a hot topic in this election.
So what are the candidates saying? What are their plans for addressing this complex issue?
Well, Trump is campaigning on repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
He's been trying to do that for years, hasn't he?
He has. He says that Obamacare is a disaster and that it needs to be replaced with something more market-driven that gives patients more choice.
What about the people who rely on Obamacare? What happens to them if it's repealed?
That's a major concern for a lot of people. Millions gained insurance under Obamacare, and they're worried about losing it.
And Harris, what's her take?
Harris wants to expand access to affordable health care. She supports Medicare for all, government-funded health care for all Americans.
That's a huge change from how things are now.
It would be. Medicare for all is a single-payer system. The government is the only one paying for health care.
What are the arguments for and against that?
Supporters say it would simplify things, reduce those administrative costs, and make sure everyone has access to affordable quality care.
And those opposed, what are their concerns?
Opponents say it would be too expensive, that it would lead to the government rationing health care, and that it would give the government too much control over people's health care choices.
Complex issue with strong arguments on both sides.
Definitely. And it'll likely be debated for years to come.
But in this election, healthcare is key for voters. And where the candidates stand on this could have a big impact on who wins.
Now let's talk about another issue that's getting more attention in climate change.
Climate change. It's a global crisis that threatens everything. Our planet, our economies, our way of life. And it's an issue that's really important to voters, especially younger generations.
The science is clear. Climate change is real. We're causing it. And it's already having a devastating impact on our planet.
More extreme weather, rising sea levels, melting glaciers. And if we don't do anything, the consequences will be catastrophic.
We need to act now, reduce emissions, switch to clean energy, and build a sustainable future.
What are the candidates saying about this? What are their plans?
Well, Trump has been a vocal skeptic of climate change. He's rolled back environmental regulations, pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, and promoted fossil fuels.
So he's essentially ignoring the science and putting the interests of the fossil fuel industry first.
That's how a lot of environmentalists see it. And they say his policies are making things worse.
And Harris? How does she approach climate change?
Harris has made climate change a central part of her campaign. She's pledged to rejoin the Paris Agreement, invest in clean energy, and reach net zero emissions by 2050.
So she's taking a much more aggressive approach.
She is. She says climate change is an existential threat, and we need to act boldly to prevent disaster.
So another major difference between the candidates in this election.
It is, and it's one that could really affect the outcome, especially among younger voters who are worried about the planet's future.
Now let's talk about another issue that's become really prominent. Social media's role in shaping political discourse.
Social media is powerful. It shapes public opinion and political debates. It allows information to spread quickly, supporters to mobilize, and voices that might have been ignored to be heard.
But it's also been a breeding ground for misinformation, hate speech, and polarization.
Absolutely. Social media has a dark side,
Hmm.
and we need to recognize that. The algorithms are designed to keep us engaged,
Hmm.
and that often means showing us content that's emotionally charged, sensationalized, and sometimes completely false.
A double-edged sword. It can be good for democracy,
Hmm.
but it can also be used to manipulate, divide, and undermine trust.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to think critically about what you see online. Be aware of those biases, check your sources, and be cautious of things that seem too good to be true or too outrageous to believe.
We need to be media literate, smart about navigating the online world, and responsible citizens of the digital age.
Exactly. And we need to hold those social media companies accountable for what's on their platforms.
They need to take steps to combat misinformation, stop the spread of hate speech, and create a more civil online environment.
Absolutely. Social media could be a force for good, but it's up to us to make sure it's used responsibly and ethically.
Now let's dive into another often overlooked issue that's vital for a healthy democracy: campaign finance reform.
Money's influence in politics is corrosive. It undermines democracy and erodes public trust in government.
We've seen how special interests use their money to sway elections, to buy access to politicians, and to get policies that benefit them.
And it's a system that helps the wealthy and powerful at the expense of everyone else.
So what can we do? How do we get big money out of politics and go back to that principle of one person, one vote?
There are a few reforms that have been suggested. Overturning Citizens United, which lets corporations and unions spend unlimited amounts on elections. Public financing of campaigns. And stronger disclosure laws to make it easier to track where the money is going.
All important steps toward a more level playing field and making sure our elections are decided by the people, not by who has the most money.
Exactly. Campaign finance reform is essential to restore trust in government and make sure our elected officials are accountable to us, not to rich donors.
A good reminder as we head into these final hours before the election. Our democracy is only as strong as our commitment to its principles, including fair and transparent elections.
Now let's look at some international events that could affect the U.S. election, starting with the war in Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine has shaken the world. It's created this ripple effect that's being felt everywhere, testing alliances, straining resources, and raising questions about the future of democracy and the international order.
It demands our attention, and it reminds us that the U.S. can't step back from its global leadership role.
The U.S. has to stand with its allies, defend democracy, and promote peace and stability.
Absolutely. And speaking of global hotspots, the Middle East is still a region filled with tension and conflict. The situation between Israel and Lebanon is especially worrying.
It's a complex and volatile region, and the U.S. has a long history there.
Any increase in violence could have big consequences for American interests and foreign policy.
We need to be careful not to get pulled into conflicts that could destabilize the region even more.
The focus should be on de-escalation, finding peaceful solutions, and addressing the root causes of the tension.
Okay, let's look at some other international headlines that could have an impact, starting with the floods in Spain.
Those floods are a stark reminder of how climate change is getting worse and the devastating impact it can have on communities worldwide.
A wake-up call to take action on this global crisis before it's too late.
Absolutely. And speaking of global trends, the pro-EU victory in Moldova is significant for Eastern Europe.
It seems like Russia's influence might be weakening.
That election result gives hope to those who believe in democracy and freedom. Even with pressure from authoritarian regimes, the desire for self-determination and democratic governance is still strong.
All of these international events remind us that the U.S. isn't isolated. We're part of a global community, and our choices have consequences that reach far beyond our borders.
Absolutely. And the results of this election will have a ripple effect around the world, shaping the global landscape for years to come.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to the economy and that paradoxical situation we're seeing.
It needs our attention and some real solutions.
We can't just ignore the struggles of those who are being left behind, even as the economy as a whole grows.
We need an economy that works for everyone, one that's fair, just, and sustainable.
Invest in people and infrastructure in our future.
Exactly. And we need to make sure that the benefits of economic growth reach all Americans, not just a select few.
And that leads us to another crucial part of this election: education. What are the candidates saying about American education and their plans?
Education is the foundation of a successful society, the key to opportunity, innovation, and a better future for all. But our education system is facing a lot of challenges.
Funding cuts teacher shortages. And that achievement gap between students from different backgrounds is getting wider.
Exactly. And these problems are impacting students' lives and their futures.
So what are the candidates suggesting? How are they going to meet the needs of our students in schools?
Well, Trump's focused on school choice. He wants policies that give parents more options for where to send their kids, like charter schools and voucher programs.
And Harris, what's her approach?
Harris says we need to invest more in public education, increase teacher pay, and make college more affordable.
So two very different approaches. Trump wants more market-based solutions, while Harris wants more government investment.
Exactly. And this difference reflects their overall beliefs about the role of government.
A debate that's been going on for a long time. And it's one that will probably continue long after this election.
Now let's focus on another issue that's often overlooked, but so important for our nation's well-being: mental health.
Mental health is just as important as physical health, and we need to treat it that way.
People are becoming more aware of mental health, but there's still a lot of stigma attached to mental illness.
And that stigma can stop people from getting the help they need.
That's why it's crucial to talk about mental health openly and honestly.
We need to get rid of that stigma, increase access to care, and support those who are struggling.
Absolutely. And we need a society that's more compassionate, understanding, and supportive of people with mental health challenges.
So what are the candidates saying about mental health? How are they going to deal with it?
Trump has talked about addressing the opioid crisis, which contributes to a lot of mental health problems.
And Harris? What are her plans?
Harris has talked about increasing access to mental health care, more funding for research, and support for programs that deal with the root causes of mental illness.
Both candidates see how important mental health is,
Yeah,
but their approaches might be different.
it's something we need to pay attention to and be committed to finding solutions for.
Now let's talk about something that's changing our world quickly: artificial intelligence.
AI is already having a huge impact on our lives, and it's only going to get bigger in the years to come.
We're seeing AI used in everything: healthcare, transportation, finance, entertainment.
And as AI gets more sophisticated, it raises a lot of questions about its potential benefits and risks.
We need to make sure it's developed and used responsibly, ethically, and in a way that benefits everyone.
We need to deal with the potential downsides of AI, like job displacement and algorithmic bias, while also using its potential to solve some of our biggest challenges.
So what are the candidates saying about AI? How are they addressing this new issue?
Trump has talked about the U.S. needing to be a leader in developing and innovating in AI. Harris wants to make sure AI is developed and used ethically and responsibly.
Both see the importance of AI, but their ideas about regulating it might differ.
It's going to require some careful thought and smart policy decisions in the years to come.
As we get closer to Election Day, let's take a moment to reflect on the power of our democracy.
Our democracy isn't perfect, but it's the best system we have.
It's based on liberty, equality, and self-government.
It lets us choose our leaders, hold them accountable, and shape the future of our nation.
We need to cherish this system, protect it, and work together to make it stronger.
Now let's shift our focus to the global stage. Let's talk about the importance of working with other countries.
The world is so interconnected. The U.S. can't do everything on its own.
We need strong alliances. We need to work together to solve common problems and promote peace and stability in the world.
And we need to do all of this while upholding our values and protecting our interests.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about something else that's crucial for our nation's future innovation.
The U.S. has always been a leader in innovation, and we need to keep encouraging that culture of creativity, entrepreneurship, and scientific discovery.
Invest in research and development, support startups, and create an environment where new ideas can thrive.
And make sure everyone benefits from innovation.
That's right. Speaking of issues that affect all Americans, let's talk about the future of work. Things are changing fast because of automation, globalization, and the gig economy.
Those changes are creating both opportunities and challenges. New jobs in fields like technology and healthcare. But jobs are disappearing in manufacturing and other industries.
And many workers are having a hard time adjusting, facing stagnant wages, no job security, and no benefits.
So what are the candidates saying about this future of work? How are they dealing with the challenges and opportunities?
Trump's focus has been on bringing back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. He says his trade policies will protect American workers.
What about Harris?
Harris wants to invest in education and training programs to get workers ready for the jobs of the future.
And she's talked about creating a safety net to help people through the changes in the economy.
So both see that the future of work is important, but they might have different ways of approaching it.
It needs careful thought and smart policy decisions for years to come.
Now let's shift gears and talk about national security.
National security is essential, and it covers a lot of different challenges, foreign and domestic.
We need to protect our borders, defend against terrorism, and keep our military strong.
But we also need to deal with cyber attacks, climate change, and pandemics.
National security requires a broad approach that covers both old and new threats.
So what are the candidates saying about national security? How do they plan to keep America safe?
Trump has taken a hard line, emphasizing military strength, border security, and being tough on immigration.
And Harris?
Harris wants a more balanced approach, one that combines military strength with diplomacy and working with other countries.
She's also talked about dealing with the root causes of conflict, like poverty, inequality, and climate change.
So different ideas on how to protect America in a complex world.
Now, as we get ready to vote, let's think about the importance of voting in this election.
Voting is a basic right and a responsibility. It's how we make our voices heard and shape the future of our country.
Every vote counts. Every voice matters.
Let's encourage everyone to register to vote, make a plan to vote, and get to the polls.
And hope that the result reflects what the people want and leads to a better future for all Americans.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about some of the things our democracy is facing.
Our democracy isn't perfect. It's a work in progress. And there are challenges.
We're seeing more political polarization, more misinformation spreading, and attacks on the integrity of our elections.
We need to address these things if we want to protect our democracy for the future.
We need to address these things head on if we want to protect our democracy for the future.
It feels like we're at a turning point. We need to decide what kind of country we want to be.
A time for reflection, thinking about our values, and renewing that commitment to what's guided this nation for so long.
Find ways to bridge the divides, restore trust in our institutions, and ensure that our elections are free, fair, and secure.
It's on all of us. We can't be complacent or apathetic. Our democracy's future depends on us being active and committed to those principles.
So with all this, all these challenges, the uncertainty, is there any room for hope? Can we find a way forward to a better future?
Absolutely. Hope is essential, even when things are tough. It pushes us to want something better, to work towards a more just and fair society.
It fuels our commitment to democracy, our belief in working together, and wanting to create a world where everyone has the chance to succeed.
And it reminds us that progress is possible, that we've made it through tough times before, and we can do it again.
We need to believe in our democracy, in our people's resilience, and in our ability to build a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Let's approach this election with hope, with that commitment to being involved, and with that belief that a brighter tomorrow is possible.
Speaking of a brighter tomorrow, what about America's role in the world? What will the next president have to deal with in international relations?
The world's facing so many complex issues, from climate change and pandemics to inequality and political instability. The next president will need wisdom, strength, and a real commitment to diplomacy and cooperation.
It feels like they'll inherit a world that's on edge, dealing with interconnected crises that need strong leadership and a willingness to work with other countries.
Exactly. The U.S. can't just isolate itself or step back from its role in the world. We need to be a force for good, promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law.
Work with our allies to tackle those shared problems, like climate change, pandemics, and terrorism.
And do all of that while upholding our values and protecting our interests. It's a delicate balance. You need to really understand how the world works and be committed to finding common ground, even when there are differences.
So on this eve of the election, the stakes are high, not just for America, but for the world.
It's a crossroads, a time to choose our path, decide what kind of country we want to be, and what role we play in the world.
It's our chance to recommit to democracy, to justice, to equality, and to creating that more perfect union.
It's a chance to show the world that American democracy is still strong and that we can handle what's thrown at us.
Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
from the campaigns to those global anxieties that are shaping this election.
It's been a lot of information, but it's been helpful, shedding light on what's going on at this important moment.
This election is about more than just picking a president. It's about our values, our priorities, and what kind of future we want for ourselves and for future generations.
It's a time to think, to be engaged, and to recommit to what makes our democracy strong.
And that brings our Election Eve special to a close. It's been intense, but it's given us a lot of insight into the issues of the candidates and everything that's affecting this election.
I hope this deep dive has helped you understand what's at stake and encouraged you to get involved in the process.
Your vote is your voice. Make it count.
And whatever the result, let's remember that making a more perfect union is a process. It needs us to keep working, keep striving for justice and equality, and believe that democracy can create a better world.
If you enjoy our daily news podcast and want to stay updated, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications. Your support really helps us bring you the latest news every day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.